The millionaire never expected to see this when he walked through the doors of his Beverly Hills mansion. Jonathan Richards froze at the sight before him, his heart pounding in disbelief. Through the crack of the kitchen door, he saw his 8-year-old adopted daughter, Aisha, crouched on the cold tile floor. Her small hands trembled as she scooped dry dog food straight from a metal bowl, the same bowl that once belonged to Duke, the golden retriever who had passed away a year earlier. Silent tears streaked down her cheeks as she chewed, each crunch echoing in Jonathan's chest like a knife. For half a minute he couldn't move, couldn't think. This was his daughter, the little girl he had rescued from an orphanage in Detroit 3 years earlier, reduced to eating like an animal inside his $10 million home. And then came the voice, the chilling, venomous voice of Victoria, his wife of 15 years. "Finish it. That's the meal a liar deserves. Who told you to complain to your father that I don't feed you?" Jonathan's blood ran cold. He was a man who had built a $200 million tech empire on logic, patience, and an unmatched ability to solve impossible problems. But at that moment, all of his brilliance meant nothing. He was just a father watching the child he loved be humiliated and starved by the woman he thought he knew. The memory of a phone call 2 hours earlier struck him like lightning. Aisha had whispered into the receiver at his office, telling him she was hungry because Victoria hadn't made her lunch again. He had chuckled at the time, thinking it was nothing more than childish drama. He had promised to bring pizza home to cheer her up. Now the truth sat before his eyes. "Daddy won't believe you," Victoria said, her tone almost playful. "He knows I take good care of you. We're a happy family, aren't we?" And then came the answer that shattered Jonathan Compy, lettily. "Yes, Mommy Victoria, we're a happy family." Aisha's voice was soft, cracked, and heavy with a surrender no child should ever know. It was the tone of someone who had already learned that survival meant burying your pain and pretending everything was fine. Jonathan staggered back from the doorway, his chest tight, his breath shallow. For 3 years he had been blind, traveling the globe, building companies, trusting Victoria to be the loving mother their daughter needed. The Instagram photos, the glowing school reports, the perfect image of a family. All of it had been a carefully crafted lie. And in that hallway, Jonathan Richards realized the unthinkable. He had saved Aisha from an orphanage, only to hand her over to a private hell wrapped in luxury. But what Victoria didn't know was that Jonathan Richards was no ordinary millionaire. He wasn't just a business prodigy who struck gold at 25. He was a man who had grown up as the only black child in elite schools, enduring prejudice and cruelty that money could never shield him from. This betrayal was personal. And if you think this story has already reached its peak, you're wrong. What happens next will prove that some secrets are far too dangerous to stay buried. Hours later, Jonathan sat alone in his private office at the top of the mansion. He had texted Victoria, saying he was tied up with an urgent overseas call and would eat dinner late. But the truth was far darker. His mind was still trapped in that kitchen, replaying the image of his little girl on the floor. Jonathan sat in his office, the glow of his laptop lighting his face as he sifted through the last 3 years of his so-called perfect family life. He worked with the precision of an analyst examining a billion-dollar deal, only this time the numbers he was dissecting were memories. Patterns began to emerge, patterns he should have noticed long ago. In every Instagram post Victoria had uploaded, she was front and center, glamorous, radiant, flawless. Aisha was always blurred in the background, barely visible, like an accessory to Victoria's image. School reports told another quiet story. Aisha often arrived late, exhausted, unfocused. Whenever Jonathan asked, Victoria brushed it off with that same smug smile. "She comes from a difficult background, honey. I have to be strict with her. She needs to learn how to behave in our social class." Those words cut Jonathan now like they hadn't before. He thought back to his own childhood, 8 years old, the only black boy in an elite Connecticut prep school. His parents, both academics, had given up everything to give him that chance. And yet, every day, he endured discrimination dressed up as standards. He knew too well how cruelty could hide beneath a polished veneer. And the realization hit him. It wasn't strangers doing this to Aisha. It was happening inside his own home. Jonathan unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out what looked like an ordinary phone charger. In reality, it was a custom surveillance device. Years of empire building had taught him a hard truth. Information was power, and power, once abused, had to be exposed. One by one, he placed tiny recorders throughout the mansion, moving with the quiet precision of a man laying the groundwork for war. As he worked, memories took on a sickening clarity. Victoria always urged him to travel more, especially on weekends. Aisha needs routine and discipline. It's easier without interference. Interference. That was the word she used to describe him. A father being kept from his own daughter. By 10 p.m., Jonathan moved silently down the staircase. The house was still, but faint voices drifted from the TV room. He opened the monitoring app on his phone, tapped into the nearest recorder, and froze as Victoria's voice poured into his ear. No, she's perfectly under control," Victoria said, chuckling darkly. "Jonathan is hardly ever home, and when he is, Aisha knows exactly what to say to keep him happy. It's all about training." Jonathan's grip on the phone tightened. Training? On the other end of the line, her sister Rebecca sounded uneasy. "But don't you think you're overreacting, Victoria?" Victoria scoffed. "Rebecca, please. You saw those kids at the orphanage. Wild, undisciplined. Someone has to civilize her. Jonathan's too soft. He sees a needy little girl and wants to play savior. I see reality." Jonathan's stomach churned, but the cruelty wasn't over. "Besides," Victoria continued, her laughter sharp and hollow, "she's useful. Jonathan loves playing the progressive hero who rescued a black child. It makes him feel enlightened. And me? Well, someone has to keep this giant house clean. At least she's good for that." Her words stabbed deeper than any betrayal he had ever faced in business. His wife hadn't just mistreated Aisha, she had dehumanized her, reduced her to free labor, mocked his love as naivety. Jonathan staggered back, leaning against the wall to steady himself, but even through the boiling rage, clarity formed. Victoria had made one fatal miscalculation. She had mistaken Jonathan Richards for a gullible fool. But Jonathan hadn't built a $200 million empire by trusting masks. He had grown up battling people who smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. And this time, he wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting his daughter. Jonathan had always believed that true revenge wasn't born out of rage, but out of patience and precision. And now, in the dead of night, as Victoria slept soundly beside him, he quietly set his plan into motion. For hours, Jonathan combed through every hidden corner of her life. Bank transfers she assumed he hadn't ever noticed, texts to her friends, bragging about how she had broken the little girl, even altered medical records designed to disguise the signs of neglect. One by one, he saved each file, each damning detail, placing his pieces on the board like a master chess player preparing for checkmate. By 5 a.m., Jonathan did something he hadn't done in years. He cooked breakfast. The same kitchen where he had seen his daughter broken now carried the warm scent of pancakes, Aisha's favorite. When she appeared at 6, already dressed for school, her wide eyes blinked in surprise at the sight of her father at the stove. Moments later, Victoria entered, irritation flickering in her expression at the disruption of her routine. "Well, what a lovely surprise," she said with a forced smile. "Daddy decided to make breakfast for us." Aisha hesitated, unsure, her small eyes darting between her father and Victoria as though she was calculating whether it was safe to show her happiness. Jonathan placed a tall stack of pancakes on her plate and smiled gently. "Eat up, my princess. You need your strength to grow." Victoria let out a laugh, but tension laced her voice. "Careful, Jonathan. Don't spoil her. You know how children can take advantage of too much kindness." Jonathan turned his gaze on her, calm, steady, unblinking. "Sometimes, Victoria," he said softly, "people take advantage of kindness in ways we can't even imagine. But eventually, there's always a reckoning." For a split second, the mask slipped. Her smile wavered. Fear glimmered faintly in her eyes before she quickly smoothed it away, but Jonathan noticed, and what she didn't know was that every word of that breakfast conversation was being recorded. For years she had dismissed Jonathan as little more than a source of wealth and status, a husband too distracted to ever see behind her mask. But she had made the gravest mistake, underestimating the man she married. Jonathan Richards hadn't built an empire at 25 by being naive, and he certainly wasn't about to watch his daughter suffer while he stayed silent. The following week, Jonathan became the most attentive husband Victoria had ever known. He came home early, suggested family dinners, planned a surprise weekend trip to Disneyland. To her friends at the Beverly Hills Club, she laughed and bragged, "Jonathan's going through such a romantic phase. I think he feels guilty for traveling so much. He's been so affectionate lately." What she didn't know was that every kiss goodnight, every warm embrace, every casual outing was part of Jonathan's strategy. Each affectionate gesture was cover for installing new recording devices. Every dinner conversation was a chance to study her habits, her guard, her true self when she believed she was safe. By Friday morning, Jonathan escalated the game. He canceled a $40 million meeting, an unthinkable move for him to personally take Aisha to school. Victoria objected immediately. "But I have a routine with her, Jonathan. You'll disrupt everything." He smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "I want to spend more time with my daughter." Victoria read the gesture as guilt. What she didn't realize was that behind Jonathan's calm exterior was a storm. Every move he made wasn't out of remorse, it was out of resolve. On the drive to school, Jonathan kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Aisha sat silently in the back seat, hands folded tightly in her lap, her little body shrinking inward as though she wanted to take up no space at all. "Aisha," he said gently, "you know you can tell me anything, right?" Her eyes widened instantly, panic flashing across her face. I'm a good girl, Daddy. Mommy. Victoria says I'm good when I behave myself." The words pierced Jonathan's chest. That reflex, equating love with obedience, was the scar of long-term abuse. Her voice, her posture, her fear, it confirmed everything. Victoria's cruelty wasn't occasional. It was systematic, calculated, and deeply psychological. That afternoon, while Victoria indulged herself at her weekly spa session, Jonathan prepared for a different kind of appointment. In his office, Marcus Thompson arrived carrying the gravity of a man who had seen battles both inside and outside the courtroom. "Jonathan, your message sounded urgent," Marcus said, his voice heavy. Marcus wasn't just his attorney. He had been Jonathan's legal shield for 15 years, his best man at his wedding, and the one person he trusted without hesitation. Known across California as a ruthless family lawyer, Marcus had a reputation for destroying opponents in cases that looked unwinnable. Jonathan closed the office door, activated a signal blocker, and wordlessly pressed play on the recordings. The air in the room grew heavier with each clip. Victoria barking orders at Aisha to scrub the entire house, Victoria locking the child in the basement for 2 hours as punishment for spilling water, Victoria bragging on the phone about how she had trained her perfectly. By the time the final video ended, Marcus's face was stone. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, running a hand over his jaw. "Jonathan, this isn't just neglect. This is criminal, systematic child abuse, emotional torture, forced labor. She could be looking at 10 years behind bars." Jonathan's reply was quiet, steady, but charged with fire. "I don't just want her in prison, Marcus. I want her stripped of everything. The house, the money, the reputation she worships more than her own humanity. I want her left with nothing." Marcus held his gaze. "Then understand this, Jonathan. Once we move, this becomes war. No settlement, no turning back." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice sharp with certainty. "She declared war the moment she made my daughter eat dog food. I'm just going to finish what she started." That weekend, Jonathan held true to his promise of Disneyland. Victoria protested, and at first muttering about overstimulating a child who needed discipline, but Jonathan insisted, and as he watched Aisha step into that world of lights, colors, and laughter, he saw something he hadn't seen in years: pure joy. Her eyes sparkled on the roller coasters, her laughter rang out unrestrained on the spinning rides, and when he won a giant teddy bear at a carnival game, she flung her arms around him without hesitation. But beneath the joy, Jonathan noticed the shadows. Each time she smiled too brightly, she'd glance nervously at Victoria, as though silently asking permission to be happy. When offered cotton candy, she shook her head automatically. "Mommy, Victoria says I can't eat junk food." Victoria, meanwhile, was detached, her phone always in hand, snapping selfies, carefully curating her online persona. Her captions told one story: beautiful family day at Disneyland. In the photo, she posed flawlessly with Jonathan, while Aisha was half hidden in the background, reduced to a prop in Victoria's performance of motherhood. Jonathan's jaw clenched as he watched it all unfold. He had given Victoria 15 years of loyalty, wealth, and status. Now, with every laugh of his daughter and every fake smile Victoria posted online, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Victoria's captions sparkled beneath another carefully staged photo. The comments poured in like a chorus of praise. "What a perfect family. Victoria, you're such an inspiration. That little girl is lucky to have you." Jonathan captured every one of them. Screenshots of the lies, the fake image of devotion, the evidence of a mask she had worn for years. They would all become ammunition when the time was right. By Monday, Marcus called with a revelation that would take this battle to another level. "Jonathan, you won't believe what we uncovered," his lawyer said, his tone edged with grim respect. Our investigator dug into Victoria's accounts. She didn't just skim money meant for Aisha. She created fake bank accounts in the girl's name, and she's been using them to launder funds and dodge taxes for 3 years. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but for the first time in weeks, a smile tugged at his lips. Not a smile of joy, one of cold recognition. He had seen enough rivals destroy themselves through arrogance, and Victoria had just handed him the rope. "Set up a meeting with the district attorney for Thursday," he said evenly. "It's time my wife learns what happens when someone targets my family." Meanwhile, Victoria continued her charade, posting polished photos and bragging to friends about how she had civilized her stepdaughter. She never realized that her cruelty was being catalogued with surgical precision. Each insult, each false post, each act of abuse woven into a perfect net of evidence that would soon close around her. In the silent laboratory of her own arrogance, Victoria had brewed the very poison that would destroy her. She was only days away from discovering that the quiet man beside her was not a gullible husband, but a strategist who had transformed her cruelty into her downfall. The storm had gathered, and Victoria, blinded by pride, was still dancing in the rain. Thursday morning, Victoria awoke to chaos, her main bank account frozen, and before she could process the shock, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood 3 FBI agents armed with federal warrants. "Mrs. Richards," Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez said, flashing her badge, "you are under investigation for tax fraud, tax evasion, and child abuse. We'll need you to come with us for questioning." Victoria's face drained of color. This is a mistake. I'm Victoria Richards. My husband is Jonathan Richards, founder of Richards Technologies. You can't just barge in here." "Actually, we can," Agent Rodriguez replied coolly. "And it was your husband who supplied the evidence that BR ought us here." The words shattered her, her knees buckled, her body trembling. Jonathan had orchestrated this? Jonathan, the man she had mocked and underestimated, had been the architect of her undoing all along. As agents moved through the mansion, photographing each luxury Victoria had funded with stolen money, Jonathan walked through the front door. Beside him was Marcus, and at his other side, a social worker, silent, watchful, there for Aisha. Jonathan's expression was calm, collected, as though he were overseeing nothing more than another corporate deal. But his eyes burned with quiet fire. He stepped into the kitchen, the very place where weeks earlier he had seen his daughter forced to eat dog food, and faced the woman who had caused it all. "Victoria," he said evenly, his voice steady enough to make the room still, "I imagine you're wondering how we got here." Victoria's lips trembled. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she tried to summon her old confidence, her old mask. But Jonathan could already see the truth. The reckoning had arrived. "Jonathan, please, can we talk in private?" Victoria's voice cracked, her polished confidence slipping. "I know there might be some misunderstandings about how I raised Aisha." "Misunderstandings?" Marcus cut in sharply, powering on his tablet. "Like this one?" On the screen, a recording played, Victoria shoving a bowl of animal feed toward Aisha. Her own voice echoed through the room, harsh, venomous. "Eat, you disgusting thing. That's the dinner a liar deserves." Victoria's face turned pale. Marcus didn't stop. He swiped to the next clip, Victoria laughing on the phone. "Someone's got to clean this huge house, don't they?" The room went silent. "You've been spying on me?" Victoria hissed, panic creeping in. "That's illegal." "Not quite," Jonathan replied calmly, his tone edged with steel. "Installing security devices in your when home to protect a child is perfectly legal, especially when abuse is suspected." At that moment, Agent Rodriguez entered, carrying a box stuffed with documents. "We've recovered the files for the fake bank accounts in the child's name. 3 years of tax evasion, using an 8-year-old as your cover. These are federal crimes, Ms. Richards." Victoria's mask finally cracked. "Jonathan, wait. I can explain. The money. It was for us, to live better. Aisha never lacked anything." Jonathan's voice dropped, cold and sharp. "Did she? Did she have the right to sit at the table like a human being? To live like a child instead of a servant? To actually use the money I sent for her?" Marcus tapped again, showing a financial report. $240,000. Stolen over 3 years. Money meant for Aisha's food, school, and health. Wasted on cars, jewelry, and your lifestyle. Jonathan's eyes hardened. "And let's not forget, your Instagram, every staged photo, every fake caption about being a loving mother, is now evidence of your lies. The FBI Digital Crimes Unit loves cases like this." Victoria lashed out in desperation. "You can't do this to me. We've been married 15 years. You'll destroy me over this." Her voice faltered. "This what?" Jonathan leaned forward, his anger finally visible. "Say it, Victoria. Finish the sentence. Show everyone who you really are." And, in her panic, she did. "Because of a child who isn't even ours, a stranger you dragged into this house." "Stop!" ordered the social worker, recording everything. "You're incriminating yourself further." Marcus's lips curled into a cold smile. "Perfect. Now we have proof the abuse was fueled by racial prejudice. That makes it a hate crime. Penalties just got a whole lot harsher." Reality hit her like a tidal wave. This wasn't just prison. This was her entire life crumbling. Her social circle, her reputation, every family at Aisha's school. The perfect image she built would be shattered. "Please," she sobbed, collapsing. "I can change. We can get help. Family therapy. I'm not really like this." Jonathan's final words to her were ice. "Victoria, you've been like this for 3 years. The only difference now is that the world finally knows." As federal agents led her away in handcuffs, past the gathering neighbors, one truth lingered in the air. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from a judge's gavel, but from the consequences a person builds for themselves through cruelty. 2 years later, the auditorium of Beverly Hills Academy glowed under the spotlights. On stage stood Aisha, her curls shining, her smile pure and free of shadows. She held a trophy for best fourth grader, her small hands steady as she spoke into the microphone. "I want to thank my daddy," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the hall. "He taught me that being different is something to celebrate, not something to hide, and that real family isn't the one that hurts you for who you are. It's the one that loves you because of who you are." In the audience, Jonathan's vision blurred with tears of pride. His little girl had not only survived, but risen. At his side, Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist who had guided Aisha's recovery, leaned in and whispered, "Jonathan, you didn't just rescue a child. You saved her very soul." The change in Aisha had been steady, but nothing short of miraculous. She now slept peacefully through the night without fear. She laughed out loud during cartoons. She pulled up a chair at the dinner table, sharing stories about her school day. Sleepovers with friends had become normal weekends. For the first time in her life, she was just a little girl, living the childhood she had been denied. Jonathan's company, Richards Technologies, had not only survived the scandal, but soared. His story, the millionaire who exposed his own wife's abuse to protect an adopted daughter, read across the world. Businesses wanted to partner with a man who proved integrity in his personal life and in his leadership. "Integrity at home is integrity in business," Jonathan told Forbes. "If a man can't protect an 8-year-old girl, how can he be trusted with the investments of thousands?" The magazine named him CEO of the Year, and within 18 months, the company's value had doubled. But while Jonathan's life thrived, Victoria's collapsed. After serving 18 months in prison for fraud and child abuse, she walked out to nothing. The divorce settlement stripped her of every dollar, thanks to the prenuptial agreement she had once signed with confidence. Her glamorous Instagram account, once boasting 200,000 adoring followers, was deleted after waves of public outrage. Former friends ignored her in public. Even her own family distanced themselves in shame. She now rented a small apartment in Van Nuys, working as a receptionist in a veterinary clinic. And every time her eyes fell on headlines celebrating Jonathan's success or photos of Aisha beaming at school events, she understood the depth of her ruin. She had once tried to sell her story to the tabloids, painting herself as the victim of a controlling husband. But the recordings and shocking videos of her cruelty to Aisha made her claims worthless. No one wanted her excuses. One Sunday afternoon, as Jonathan and Aisha baked cookies in the kitchen of their Malibu home overlooking the ocean, his lawyer Marcus called with an odd update. "Jonathan," Marcus said, half amused, "Victoria has filed for child support. claims you left her financially vulnerable. Jonathan chuckled for the first time in years at the mention of her name. And what did you tell them? I sent the court her recorded confession, the one where she admits to stealing money meant for Aisha and spending it on jewelry. The judge dismissed the case within 48 hours and even warned her about abusing the system. That night, as Aisha drifted off to sleep in the princess-themed bed, room she had proudly decorated herself, Jonathan reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. His sweetest victory wasn't seeing Victoria behind bars, though that had brought a measure of justice. No, the real triumph was hearing Aisha's laughter echoing through their new home. Victoria had tried to crush the spirit of a child for greed and prejudice, but Jonathan had built her a world where she was not just safe, but celebrated. The girl who once ate dog food in secret now enjoyed 5-star dinners, not because wealth mattered, but because she deserved to be treated like the princess she always was. Aisha hadn't merely survived, she had bloomed into a confident, joyful, and deeply loved child. And though Jonathan still carried the haunting memory of finding her crouched in that Beverly Hills kitchen, the pain had transformed. It no longer crushed him. It fueled him. It reminded him daily of his duty to protect what truly matters. Because the true measure of a man isn't his fortune or power, but whether he defends those who cannot defend themselves. Victoria had forgotten that lesson, and for it she lost everything, including the chance to be part of Aisha's extraordinary life. Jonathan had learned something greater. The most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so full of love and beauty that betrayal fades into irrelevance. He didn't just reclaim his daughter, he became the father she had always deserved. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can turn injustice into triumph, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is living a life so radiant, it leaves your enemies powerless.